Welcome to another episode of the Dead Rite. I'm your host, and today we delve into a tale so disturbing that many historians have deliberately obscured its details from public record. This is the story of the Fenwick family, a lineage plagued by inexplicable tragedies, bizarre occurrences, and a persistent shadow that followed them across continents and centuries. Before we begin, I must warn you, what you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. The history of the Fenwicks isn't merely a chronicle of misfortune. It's a testament to forces beyond our comprehension, forces that some believe were determined to erase this bloodline from existence. Our story begins in 1647 in the misty moors of northern England, where the family estate known as Ravenscroft Manor was established by Ambrose Fenwick, a minor nobleman with grand ambitions. The property was obtained under suspicious circumstances. The previous owners, the Blackwood family, all perished in a mysterious fire just weeks before Ambrose acquired the land for a fraction of its worth. Those familiar with the area often spoke of the land's troubled history. Local folklore suggested that the grounds of Ravenscroft had once been sacred to pagan worshippers, a place where the veil between our world and something else was frighteningly thin. Yet Ambrose, a man of science and skepticism, dismissed such tales as the superstitious ramblings of uneducated peasants. Ambrose's wife, Eleanor, however, was less dismissive. From the moment she stepped foot on the grounds, she claimed to hear whispers in the walls, soft, unintelligible murmurs that followed her throughout the house. She complained of vivid nightmares in which she witnessed generations of her unborn children suffering horrific fates. These dreams were so disturbing that Eleanor began to keep a detailed journal, which would later become one of the most important primary sources for understanding the Fenwick curse. "I saw them all tonight," she wrote in one particularly haunting entry. "Children I have not yet born, and their children, and their children's children. All of them suffering, all of them dying before their time. And behind them all, a shadow watching, waiting, hungering. It knows their names, names I have not yet chosen. It knows their faces, faces I have not yet seen. And it is patient, so very patient." Within a year of moving to Ravenscroft, Eleanor gave birth to twins, a boy named Edmund and a girl named Margaret. The delivery was difficult, and the midwife later reported that the babies were born with unusual birthmarks, small, crescent-shaped marks at the base of their necks that seemed to darken and fade with the phases of the moon. For a time, life at Ravenscroft appeared normal. Ambrose's business ventures flourished, and the twins grew into healthy, if somewhat peculiar, children. They were inseparable, often speaking in a private language that no one else could understand. They would be found wandering the grounds at night, claiming to be following the whispering ones who told them secrets about the future. The first true tragedy struck on the twins' 7th birthday. During their celebration, young Margaret wandered away from the party and disappeared into the dense woods surrounding the estate. A search party was organized immediately, but the girl seemed to have vanished without a trace. 3 days later, Edmund began screaming in the middle of the night, insisting that his sister was calling to him from the old well on the eastern edge of the property, a well that had been sealed before the Fenwicks had even moved in. When Ambrose and the servants went to investigate, they found the well's heavy stone cover had somehow been moved aside. At the bottom, they discovered Margaret's body, her eyes open and staring, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. What disturbed the investigators most was not just the girl's death, but the condition of her body. Despite having been missing for 3 days, Margaret showed no signs of decomposition. Her skin was cold to the touch, yet she had no water in her lungs, suggesting she hadn't drowned. Most bizarrely, clutched in her hand was a small, intricately carved stone figurine of unknown origin, a hunched, inhuman shape with too many limbs and what appeared to be tentacles emerging from its back. The local constable, a superstitious man named Thaddeus Cooper, wrote in his report, "The child's death bears no natural explanation." The well was sealed, the stone cover too heavy for a child to move, and that cursed figurine. I have seen its like only once before, in a book of forbidden knowledge that should never have been written. If this is what I fear it is, then God help the Phoenix, for nothing else can. Margaret's death changed the family irrevocably. Eleanor retreated into herself, spending her days writing frantically in her journals and her nights wandering the halls of Ravenscroft, listening to the whispers that now seemed to follow her everywhere. Ambrose threw himself into his work, often traveling for months at a time, as if trying to escape the shadow that had fallen over his home. Edmund, however, underwent the most disturbing transformation. Once a bright, talkative child, he became withdrawn and silent. He refused to leave his room during daylight hours, claiming that the sun hurts them, and when they hurt, they make me hurt, too. The only person he would speak to was his mother, and servants reported overhearing their conversations in which Edmund would sometimes speak in his sister's voice, relaying messages from what he called the other side. 2 years after Margaret's death, disaster struck again. A mysterious illness swept through the household, killing 5 servants in a matter of days. The symptoms were unlike anything the local physician had ever seen: extreme sensitivity to light, followed by the appearance of crescent-shaped lesions similar to the birthmarks on the Fenwick twins, and finally a kind of madness in which the victims would babble about the whispering ones before their bodies simply stopped, not through any detectable failure of the heart or lungs, but as if whatever animated them had simply departed. Ambrose, who had been away on business, returned to find his household in chaos and his wife on the brink of madness. Determined to understand what was happening, he began to research the history of the land on which Ravenscroft stood. What he discovered horrified him. The area had indeed been a site of pagan worship, but not of any recognized cult or religion. Ancient texts referred to a group called the Keepers of the Veil, who believed that certain locations around the world served as doorways to other dimensions, places where entities not of our reality could cross over. Ravenscroft, it seemed, was built upon one such doorway. The Keepers had performed rituals to keep whatever existed on the other side from crossing over. But these rituals required blood sacrifice, a tradition the Blackwood family, the previous owners of the land, had maintained in secret for generations. When they all perished in the fire, the ritual stopped. And according to the texts Ambrose uncovered, when the ritual stopped, the door began to open. Ambrose, a man of reason now faced with the unreasonable, made a fateful decision. If blood was required to close the door, then blood would be provided. Not the blood of innocents, as the Keepers and Blackwoods had used, but the blood of those who had unwittingly opened the door, his own family. On the winter solstice of 1656, Ambrose performed a ritual of his own design, combining elements from the Keepers' texts with his own scientific knowledge. Eleanor and Edmund were willing participants, both convinced by now that something unnatural had attached itself to their family. The ritual took place in the cellar of Ravenscroft, directly above what Ambrose believed to be the doorway. The details of what occurred that night were never fully documented. But what is known is that by morning, Ambrose was dead, his body found at the center of an intricate symbol drawn in his own blood. Eleanor and Edmund survived, but both bore new crescent marks on their palms, marks that, unlike their natural birthmarks, did not fade with the moon's phases. In her journal, Eleanor wrote, "The door is closed, but not locked. Ambrose has bought us time, but at such a cost. The shadow remains, watching, waiting. It has tasted our blood now, and it will not forget. It will follow our line, seeking a way back. We must scatter, hide, ensure that the blood of the Phoenix is diluted until whatever seeks us can no longer recognize its taste. This is our burden now, to ensure our bloodline never gathers in strength again. For if it does, the door will open once more." Following Ambrose's death, Eleanor and Edmund left Ravenscroft. The manor was boarded up, and rumors spread that it was haunted. Those brave or foolish enough to venture onto the grounds reported hearing whispers and seeing strange, flickering shadows even on the brightest of days. Eleanor and Edmund traveled south, eventually settling in London, where they lived under the assumed name of Fletcher. Edmund, now a young man, married a woman named Sarah Collins, and together they had 3 children, James, Thomas, and Anne. None of the children bore the crescent birthmark, leading Eleanor to hope that perhaps whatever had attached itself to their family had finally let go. This hope proved short-lived. On his 18th birthday, James Fenwick, now Fletcher, began to experience the same nightmares his grandmother had described in her journals, visions of generations yet unborn, suffering and dying before their time. And behind them all, the shadow, still watching, still waiting. Eleanor, realizing that the entity had not forgotten them but had merely been biding its time, made a desperate decision. The Fenwick bloodline had to be scattered even further. Using the last of the family's wealth, she arranged for each of her grandchildren to be sent to different corners of the world, James to the American colonies, Thomas to France, and Anne to Scotland. Each was given a new identity and a sealed letter to be opened on their 30th birthday, explaining their true heritage and the curse that followed their bloodline. Eleanor herself remained in London with Edmund, both of them now dedicated to researching any possible means of breaking the curse permanently. They corresponded with scholars and occultists across Europe, gathering knowledge about similar cases and potential remedies. One such correspondent was a Dutch scholar named Peter van der Groff, who had studied numerous family curses across the continent. His conclusion was both fascinating and disturbing. What you describe is not a curse in the traditional sense, but a form of parasitic entity, one that attaches itself to bloodlines rather than individuals. Such entities feed on the life force of their hosts over generations, growing stronger with each death. They are patient predators, willing to wait centuries for their prey to multiply before they feast. The only documented cases of such entities being defeated involve the complete extinction of the targeted bloodline. This revelation led Eleanor to a grim realization: the only way to truly end the curse was to end the Fenwick line entirely. But she could not bring herself to advocate for such a drastic measure. Instead, she and Edmund continued to search for an alternative, developing a set of rituals and precautions that could at least keep the entity at bay. These included never allowing multiple Fenwick descendants to live under the same roof, performing a specific cleansing ritual on each full moon, and most importantly, ensuring that no Fenwick ever returned to Ravenscraft or the surrounding area where the entity's influence was strongest. Edmund died in 1680 at the age of 32, relatively young, but older than many cursed Fenwicks would live to be. Eleanor survived him by another 15 years, using her remaining time to compile all their research into a comprehensive grimoire that she sent copies of to each of her grandchildren. This book, known as the Fenwick Legacy *, would become a crucial guide for future generations attempting to navigate their cursed heritage. The story now splits into 3 branches, following the descendants of James, Thomas, and Anne. Each branch encountered its own manifestations of the curse, shaped by the cultures and circumstances in which they found themselves. James Fenwick, now James Foster, established himself in Massachusetts, where he became a successful merchant. He married twice and fathered 6 children, none of whom knew of their true heritage until their 30th birthdays. When James revealed the truth and distributed copies of his grandmother's grimoire, the American branch of the family seemed to fare better than their European counterparts, possibly due to the distance from Ravenscraft. However, they still experienced their share of tragedies. Every 3rd generation, a child would be born with the crescent birthmark, and these children invariably died before reaching adulthood, usually in bizarre accidents involving water or reflective surfaces. One particularly disturbing case was that of Eliza Foster, born in 1743 with the telltale birthmark. At the age of 7, she was found drowned in a puddle barely deep enough to cover her face. Witnesses claimed that in the moments before her death, the puddle's surface had shown not a reflection of the sky above, but what appeared to be a window into somewhere else, a place of twisted geometries and impossible colors. The French branch, descended from Thomas, integrated into the aristocracy under the name Fontaine. They approached the curse from a more scientific perspective, documenting each manifestation meticulously and seeking rational explanations. This analytical approach served them well until the French Revolution, when their association with the nobility led to most of the family being executed. One survivor, Marguerite Fontaine, escaped to England, where, in a twist of fate, she settled in the very village near Ravenscraft without knowing its significance to her family history. The consequences were immediate and severe. Within weeks of her arrival, the entire village was plagued by nightmares. Children reported seeing a tall, thin figure with too many joints watching them from windows and doorways. Livestock died mysteriously, their bodies found drained of blood with crescent-shaped wounds on their necks. Marguerite herself began to waste away, her body aging decades in a matter of months. When a local historian finally made the connection between Marguerite Fontaine and the long-abandoned Ravenscraft estate, the villagers turned on her. She was found dead in her cottage, her body contorted in a position that human bones should not have been able to achieve, her eyes and mouth sewn shut with an unidentified black thread that medical examiners could not cut or burn. The Scottish branch, taking the name Fraser, turned to the church for protection. Many became clergy, believing that faith could shield them from the curse. This branch produced the most detailed records of their encounters with the entity, which they interpreted as a demon sent to test their faith. Reverend Malcolm Fraser, writing in 1802, described his encounter. "It came to me in the form of my dead sister, perfect in every detail, save for her eyes, which were windows into a void so profound that to gaze into them was to know the true meaning of infinity. It spoke with her voice, offering me knowledge beyond mortal understanding in exchange for a simple favor, to gather the scattered Fenwick descendants for a family reunion at the ancestral home. I refused, of course, and began to recite the prayers my grandmother had taught me. As I spoke, its form melted like wax, revealing something beneath the borrowed flesh, something with too many angles, too many mouths. It retreated, but not before promising to return when my faith wavered." Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the scattered Fenwick descendants, now bearing dozens of different surnames, largely managed to keep the curse at bay by following Eleanor's precautions. But as generations passed and family connections grew more distant, knowledge of the curse became diluted, dismissed as superstition or forgotten entirely. The turning point came in 1897 when an American industrialist named Howard Phillips purchased the long-abandoned Ravenscraft estate with the intention of restoring it as a summer home. Phillips, unknown to himself, was a descendant of James Foster, formerly Fenwick, through his mother's line. His acquisition of Ravenscraft represented the first time in nearly 250 years that a Fenwick descendant had taken ownership of the property. The restoration work was plagued by accidents from the start. Workers reported tools disappearing only to be found arranged in strange patterns in otherwise empty rooms. Several men fell from scaffolding despite proper safety measures. 3 stonemasons went mad after breaking through a wall in the cellar, babbling about the geometry of the dark before clawing out their own eyes. Phillips himself began to experience vivid dreams about ancestors he didn't know he had. In these dreams, they warned him to abandon the project and flee. But Phillips, a self-made man with no patience for superstition, pressed on. The situation deteriorated when Phillips moved his family into the partially restored east wing of the manor. His wife, Catherine, began hearing whispers in the walls, the same whispers Eleanor had documented centuries earlier. Their children, 6-year-old twins Elliot and Evelyn, developed an obsession with the sealed well on the eastern edge of the property, the same well where Margaret Fenwick had been found. On the winter solstice of 1897, exactly 241 years after Ambrose Fenwick's ritual, the Phillips family vanished without a trace. The only clue was a journal found in Howard's study, the final entry reading, "They're coming through now." The door was never fully closed. All these years, it was opening inch by inch, and I was the key it needed. Fenwick blood returned to Fenwick land. God forgive me. I've doomed us all. The disappearance of the Phillips family made international headlines, with theories ranging from elaborate insurance fraud to mass murder. The estate was once again abandoned, this time cordoned off by authorities as a crime scene. Eventually, the case went cold, and Ravenscraft passed into legend, a place locals warned their children to avoid. What nobody realized was that Howard Phillips had inadvertently triggered a resurgence of the curse. The entity, having fed on the Phillips family, was stronger now and able to extend its reach further than ever before. Across the world, people with even a drop of Fenwick blood began to experience nightmares, to hear whispers, to see shadows moving at the corners of their vision. Most had no idea why they were being targeted. The knowledge of the Fenwick curse had been lost to most branches of the family, the grimoires either destroyed or locked away and forgotten. Those who sought medical help were diagnosed with various psychiatric conditions. Those who didn't often met tragic ends, their deaths filed away as accidents, suicides, or unexplained phenomena. One person who did understand what was happening was Elizabeth Blackwood, a professor of folklore at Miskatonic University in Massachusetts. Blackwood was a descendant of both the original Blackwood family, who had owned the land before the Fenwicks, and, through a complex series of marriages over centuries, the Scottish branch of the Fenwick family as well. Blackwood had made the study of family curses her life's work, driven by the fragmentary knowledge of her own heritage passed down through her grandmother. When reports began to surface in 1898 of people across the globe experiencing identical nightmares featuring crescent moons and whispering shadows, she recognized the pattern. Using university resources, Blackwood began to track down individuals experiencing these phenomena, constructing an extensive family tree that connected them all back to the original Fenwicks. Her research revealed a disturbing escalation in the curse's activity. What had once been a gradual predation on the bloodline over centuries had accelerated into something more urgent, more hungry. In a paper published in an obscure academic journal, Blackwood wrote, "The entity tethered to the Fenwick bloodline appears to be approaching some form of maturation. Previous manifestations suggest a pattern of feeding and dormancy, like a parasite that gorges itself and then digests. But the current wave of activity indicates continuous feeding across multiple branches of the family simultaneously. Something has changed in the relationship between predator and prey." Blackwood's attempts to warn affected families met with limited success. Most dismissed her theories as academic fantasy. Others, already struggling with what they believed to be mental illness, were further traumatized by the suggestion that something supernatural was targeting them. A few, however, recognized the truth in her words and sought her help. Together, this small group began to compile their experiences, comparing notes on effective defenses and identifying patterns in the entity's behavior. They discovered that certain materials, silver, iron, and salt, seemed to repel the influence temporarily. They found that the entity was strongest during the new moon and weakest during the full moon, the opposite of traditional werewolf lore, Blackwood noted, because this is not a creature of our natural world, but its inverse. Most significantly, they realized that the entity could not directly harm its victims. Instead, it influenced them toward self-destruction, clouding their minds with despair or manipulating circumstances to place them in danger. This explained why so many Fenwick descendants had died by suicide or in accidents that seemed just plausible enough to avoid supernatural scrutiny. Armed with this knowledge, Blackwood and her allies developed a set of protocols to protect themselves, regular cleansing rituals, protective circles of salt and iron, and a buddy system to ensure no one was ever alone during vulnerable periods like the new moon. For several years, these measures kept the worst at bay. The group grew, with Blackwood eventually tracking down over 100 Fennec descendants across 4 continents. Together, they formed a loose network they called the Scattered Ones, sharing information and resources to combat their shared curse. But the entity was adaptive. As its victims developed defenses, it developed new methods of attack. Physical manifestations became more common, shadows that moved independently of their owners, reflections that showed different faces, voices that called to victims from empty rooms. Several members of the Scattered Ones disappeared despite following all precautions, their homes found empty but undisturbed, as if they had simply stepped out of reality. The breaking point came in 1912 when Blackwood herself vanished during an expedition to Ravenscraft. She had gone there with 3 colleagues, all Fennec descendants, believing that the key to ending the curse might lie at its origin point. Their equipment was found scattered around the sealed well where Margaret Fennec had died centuries earlier. Of the 4, only one was ever found, Jonathan Pierce, a distant cousin of Blackwood's. Pierce was discovered wandering the moors 3 weeks later, his hair turned completely white, his mind shattered. Before being committed to an asylum, he managed to convey a fragmented message to his sister, the door. It's not a door anymore. It's a mouth. And it's so hungry. Elizabeth saw what was on the other side. She understood. The bloodline was never meant to endure. It has to end. All of it. While there's still time. Following Blackwood's disappearance, the Scattered Ones fell into disarray. Without her leadership and scholarly approach, many fell back on superstition or abandoned the fight entirely. Some branches of the family managed to maintain the protective practices she had established, passing them down as family traditions without fully explaining their purpose. Throughout the 20th century, the curse continued to manifest in various ways, adapting to the changing world. During World War I, an unusually high number of soldiers with Fennec blood died in bizarre circumstances, not from enemy fire, but from accidents in training, strange illnesses that baffled military doctors, or by wandering into no man's land as if called by voices only they could hear. The Great Depression saw a spike in suicides among Fennec descendants, many leaving behind identical notes that read simply, "The Whispering Ones say this is the only way." The development of psychiatric medications in the mid-20th century provided some relief to those experiencing the mental effects of the curse, though the entity eventually found ways around this chemical barrier. One branch of the family, the Hendersons of Seattle, descended from the American Fosters, took a technological approach to the problem. Richard Henderson, a software engineer, developed an algorithm to track unusual deaths and psychiatric diagnoses around the world, looking for patterns that might indicate Fennec descendants being targeted. His system identified several previously unknown branches of the family, allowing them to be warned and protected. Henderson's daughter, Julia, expanded on her father's work, creating an online database that Fennec descendants could use to share information anonymously. This digital network became the modern incarnation of the Scattered Ones, with members across the globe supporting each other and documenting their experiences. The most comprehensive of these accounts came from Maya Chen, a novelist living in Singapore whose grandmother had been a foster from Massachusetts. Chen experienced her first manifestation of the curse at age 29, unusually late, suggesting that the entity had initially overlooked her due to her mixed heritage. Chen's experiences began with the standard nightmares and whispers but quickly escalated to more elaborate phenomena. She reported waking to find her apartment rearranged with furniture placed in geometric patterns similar to those described in Eleanor's original grimoire. Her computer would turn on by itself, displaying text in an alphabet she didn't recognize but somehow understood, messages promising power and knowledge in exchange for a simple favor, to organize a family reunion. Using Julia Henderson's network, Chen connected with other Fennec descendants experiencing similar escalations. Together, they noticed a pattern. The entity seemed to be making the same offer to multiple family members simultaneously, always framed as a reunion or gathering of the bloodline. This led to a disturbing theory. The entity was attempting to reverse Eleanor Fennec's original strategy of scattering the family. It wanted the bloodline concentrated again, gathered in one place where it could feed more efficiently. Or perhaps for some purpose none of them had yet guessed. The situation reached a critical point in 2010 when an anonymous donor offered to fund a genealogical study for people with certain uncommon genetic markers that Julia Henderson recognized corresponded precisely with Fennec descendants. The study invited participants to a fully paid retreat at a recently restored historic manor in northern England. The manor's name was never mentioned in the promotional materials, but Henderson's contacts in the UK confirmed what she feared: it was Ravenscraft. Working frantically, the Scattered Ones launched a counter-campaign, warning all known Fennec descendants to avoid the study. They created fake news stories about fraud associated with the project and even reported it to authorities as a potential cult recruitment scheme. Their efforts prevented most of their network from falling into the trap, but they couldn't reach everyone. 17 people attended the retreat at Ravenscraft. None were ever seen again. Official investigations concluded that the group had fallen victim to a mass suicide pact, though no bodies were recovered. The manor itself burned to the ground a week after their disappearance, the fire so intense that it melted the stone foundations. Ground-penetrating radar later revealed something unusual beneath where the cellar had been, a perfectly circular void 30 feet in diameter that no equipment could penetrate. Attempts to drill into this space were abandoned after 3 separate drilling teams quit, all citing nightmares and voices telling them to stop. The loss of those 17 descendants, the largest gathering of Fennec blood in over 350 years, seemed to satisfy the entity temporarily. For several years following the Ravenscraft incident, manifestations of the curse decreased significantly. Members of the Scattered Ones dared to hope that perhaps the entity had gorged itself into dormancy again. This hope was shattered in 2015 when Julia Henderson's tracking algorithm detected a new pattern: Fennec descendants around the world were having children at an unprecedented rate. Many reported feeling compelled to reproduce, describing an overwhelming biological urge that overrode their previous decisions to remain childless. More disturbing still, an unusually high percentage of these children were born with the crescent birthmark, the first time in recorded history that more than a handful of marked Fennecs had existed simultaneously. Dr. Elias Norton, a geneticist and Fennec descendant himself, managed to obtain DNA samples from several of these children. His analysis revealed something impossible: genetic markers that didn't match either parent, segments of DNA that didn't appear to be human at all when compared to the standard genome. Something is changing these children at a fundamental level, Norton wrote in his report to the Scattered Ones. The entity isn't just feeding on the bloodline anymore. It's reshaping it. For what purpose, I can't begin to guess, but I don't believe these children are entirely ours anymore. This brings us to the present day, where the remaining members of the Scattered Ones face an impossible dilemma. The entity that has hunted their family for centuries appears to be entering a new phase of its existence, using their bloodline to incarnate itself into our world through a new generation of children. Yet these children, whatever else they might be, are still their sons and daughters, innocent of any wrongdoing. Some advocate for drastic measures, sterilization of all known Fennec descendants, or even more extreme solutions they dare not speak aloud. Others believe that the answer lies in returning to Eleanor's original research, that somewhere in the grimoires and journals, there might be a way to sever the connection between their bloodline and the entity permanently. A third faction, led by Maya Chen, proposes something radical: to stop fighting the curse and instead attempt to communicate with it. For centuries, we've seen this entity as a predator and ourselves as prey, Chen argues. But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's something it wants beyond simply feeding on us? The original texts speak of a doorway, of something trying to cross over. What if all this time it's been trying to tell us something? This approach has gained traction among younger Fennec descendants, particularly those born with the crescent mark who have lived with the entity's presence their entire lives. They report that when they stop resisting the whispers and instead listen to them, the messages they receive are not always threatening. There are fragments of knowledge, glimpses of a reality operating on different rules than our own, and always a sense of desperate urgency. They're afraid of something, reports Zoe Foster, a 16-year-old with the birthmark. Something is coming, something even they fear, and they need us to survive it. The Fennec bloodline was never meant to endure this long on its own. It was meant to evolve. This interpretation remains highly controversial among the scattered ones. Is it genuine insight, or is the entity simply adapting its tactics again, finding a new way to manipulate its prey by presenting itself as a potential ally? The debate continues, but time may be running out. Reports of manifestations are increasing again, and the Mark children are exhibiting disturbing new abilities, telepathic connections with each other, influence over electronic devices, and in some cases, the power to manipulate physical reality in small but significant ways. Whatever the truth about the Fennec curse may be, one thing is certain: the bloodline that was never meant to endure has endured. Against all odds, across continents and centuries, through tragedy and persecution, the descendants of Ambrose and Eleanor Fennec have survived. Whether that survival represents a victory or merely a prolonged defeat remains to be seen. The most recent development in this ongoing saga occurred just last month when all the Mark children across the world reported having the same dream on the same night. In this dream, they stood together at the edge of the void beneath Ravenscraft. A voice spoke to them, not in whispers this time, but clearly and directly: the veil is thinning. What was separated must be rejoined. What was scattered must be gathered. The bloodline endures for a purpose, and that purpose is now at hand. The door will open one final time, and you must choose whether to close it forever or step through into what awaits. The shadow has been patient. The shadow has been watching. The shadow has been preparing you. The time of choosing is near. What this message means, what choice these children will face, and what consequences that choice will have for the rest of humanity, these questions remain unanswered. The Fennec descendants continue their vigil, watching and waiting for the next manifestation of their ancient curse, hoping that when the final confrontation comes, they will make the right decision. As for Ravenscraft itself, the land remains empty, cordoned off by authorities due to environmental concerns. Locals still avoid it, though few remember exactly why. At night, lights can sometimes be seen moving through the ruins. Investigators say they're just local teenagers daring each other to venture into the haunted manor. But those who have lived near the land for generations know better. They know that the whispering ones are growing louder. They know that the shadows are growing longer. And they know that whatever has been watching the Fennec bloodline all these centuries is getting ready to step into the light. The question now is not whether the Fennec bloodline was meant to endure. It's what it has endured for. And the answer to that question may determine the fate of far more than just one family. For those of you watching who may have experienced unusual nightmares involving crescents and whispers, who may have found yourselves drawn to this story for reasons you can't explain, who may even bear a small birthmark at the base of your neck that seems to darken and fade with the phases of the moon, consider this not just a history, but a warning. Check your family tree. Look for the names we've mentioned: Fennec, Foster, Fontaine, Fraser, Phillips, Henderson, Chen. If you find them, know that you are not alone. The scattered ones are still out there, still fighting, still searching for answers. And whatever you do, stay away from Ravenscraft. The door is not yet fully open, but it's no longer fully closed. And something is waiting just on the other side. Something that knows your name before you've spoken it. Something that has been watching your family for longer than you can imagine. Something that whispers in the dark. The bloodline endures. The bloodline endures. The bloodline endures. But the most terrifying question of all remains unanswered. What if it was never meant to? They're watching you now. Through your eyes. They've always been watching.